Hi and welcome. The first laugh came like the clink of cutlery, sharp, thoughtless, contagious. Mira heard it from the back of the ballroom as the groom lifted a crystal flute and crooked a smirk in her direction. On the screens behind him, a slideshow flickered photos of her at 26. Paint under her fingernails, her mouth half open, as if ready to explain what love could forgive to my ex-wife. Adrienne said, letting the words settle like ash on a white tablecloth. An instruction manual for what not to do. Something in Mira's chest went very still, and then the doors opened. "Shut up," said a voice. Hallway house was the sort of English manner that had been bought and sold by people who preferred the dignity of old stone to the transparency of glass. The ceilings were a geography of molded crescents and roses. The lawn pressed into obedience by 6 gardeners and a schedule. Inside, under chandeliers that did their best impression of champagne, the wedding of Adrien Cole and Charlotte. Fairfax was Baroque, with hydrangeas and intintionity. Arrived late on purpose, showing up at the exact hour on an embossed card. Adrienne's assistant felt too obedient. She hated the invitation's tone. KOI daring like a magician, asking his old assistant to volunteer again. The RSVP line had read, "Will attend," with an insulted flourish. And she had typed back, "Fine," as if she were agreeing to hold a door. She wore a slate blue dress from a consignment shop off West Grove, the kind of color that belonged to Horizon. Lines and careful exits. She kept to the periphery, a ghost with a spine. Furthermore, she told herself she was here to be done with things, to confirm to herself and to the versions of herself who woke, sometimes believing they were still married, that it was over. From the Drien looked like money on its third coat of Polish dot. He had the same hair he had when they'd met in a freezing Hackle co-working space, but it was styled, now controlled. The tuxedo fit, of course. Tailoring had always been his second religion, after winning his bride. Charlotte was all frosted light and pedigreed angles. Her veil fell like an apology over a face that would never have to apologize. To give Charlotte a fair sentence, she looked stunning and frightened. There had been nibble speeches, the father of the bride, a school friend who told a story about supplanted French homework and adolescent rebellion, a venture capitalist with pink socks explaining the origin of the new couple's couple names. That's how humiliation succeeds, not with a drum beat, but with subtraction. Sand dribbled out from under your feet until you notice you're sinking. Adrienne stood, tapped his glass with a butter knife, and the room's conversational strands braided into attention. "Friends," he began. "Family. LPS. Laughter. Venture capital. Humor." He paused for the chuckles to tidy themselves away, the pace of a man for whom rooms parted. "You've heard a lot about us. About me and this extraordinary woman." He touched Charlotte's hand with the choreography of a performance. "But I've been thinking," he continued, "that gratitude isn't complete unless you shoulder it against the contrast that made it necessary." The first image glimmered to life behind him. A photo of Mira asleep at a desk in their old flat, the halo of a desk lamp bathing. A geography of posits. A knot of people murmured, "Is that?" The caption swam up in a branded font. "The past." Mira's mouth cooled. She felt absurdly for her phone, as if there were a button that could rewind him back into decency. "Some of you know," Adrienne said, "that I made a few early mistakes." He smiled. The smile was a scalpel. "I married in the prototype days." Another photo. Mira in an oversized hoodie on the floor of a rented office, whiteboarding a messy swim of arrows. Good intentions. Blinked. The crowd laughed. The kind of laughing that uses the host's cues to decide what's safe. "I learned that loyalty isn't love," Adrienne continued. "That chaos isn't creativity." He lifted a hand to the screen, and the photos stuttered into an email screenshot. A paragraph in Mira's voice. Her typing voice from 3 years earlier. Apologizing for being scattered and promising to be clearer about priorities. The subject line I'm trying, another laugh uglier. Now Charlotte's hand tightened on her bouquet. Mira's heart did a peculiar trick. Not a break, not a pound. A stillness like winter water. A flat mirror reflecting the chandelier. A waiter whispered, "Are you all right?" And Mira nodded because dignity had muscles too. "Some of you knew us then," Adrien was saying warm, with the cruelty of control. "You watched me carry dead weight. But I am a man who learns." He raised his glass to learning. He was still smiling when the two oak doors at the end of the ballroom swung open. Like a scene that had been rehearsed and rejected for being too theatrical. The man who entered didn't belong to the room. He made the room belong to him. He didn't apologize for the interruption, because apologies were for people with less gravity. "Shut up," he said conversationally, as if adjusting the lighting, and the crystal of the place seemed to listen. Adrien blinked glass mirror. His mouth arranged itself into the old version of charm. "Elia," he said, "we were just I know what you were doing, Elia." Markov's voice had an accent that refused to be pinned down. Europe had sanded the vowels. London had sharpened the consonants, and New York had taught the pauses to work. He wore a suit that was like a good decision, nothing flashy, nothing wrong. At his left wrist, a watch that could have paid for the flowers. He didn't look at Mira. That was the first kindness. "We will talk outside," Adrien said, his face searching for the emergency exit of humor. "Enjoy the bar, everyone. There's a lamb station." "No," Elia said. The word fell flat. "Absolute. We talk now." He moved along the aisle between tables as if he'd ordered the layout. The guests' heads tracked him. Some had their phones up trying to serve their gods of virality. Others lowered their eyes with that ancient human calculation. If the predator has selected prey, be still. "Elia," Charlotte tried. "This is your wedding." He finished for her and softened just enough to be kind. "Yes. Forgive me." He turned to Adrien. "As of 9 this morning," he said, "Spiral Holdings closed on a purchase of Phoenix position in here. Thine's convertible notes. You remember the notes you signed, personal guarantees. You told your lawyers you'd bullied your ex-wife into accepting responsibility. For that was untrue." The room hummed at a new register. "Scandal. Frequency. Your company's in breach of 2 covenants. As of last quarter, I've given your CFO a path." However, he lifted his eyes to the screen, to the email, to Mira's private apology smeared across a woman's day. "Are in breach of decency." Adrien laughed. Then a brittle sound. "You came here to lecture me at my wedding. I came to prevent you from making a public spectacle that would expose you to litigation." Elia's gaze slid briefly toward Mira, and she finally saw him, not as a man filling a doorway, but as the person who had only ever texted her at 12-hour intervals, never twice in a row. Always with full words and no demands. She did not want to be saved. She wanted this to end without blood. "Who even are you?" A cousin at a table whispered badly. "Elia Markov." Someone else breathed, and Charlotte's eyes widened by degrees one could measure. Elia put his hands in his pockets the way certain men do when they're certain the room will not punish the gesture. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Cole," he said with a neat warmth for Charlotte that had nothing to do with forgiveness and everything to do with manners. "Enjoy your cake." He looked back at Adrien. "But for tonight, shut up, take down the slides. Apologize to your ex-wife publicly, and then never say her name again without respect." There was a silence that lengthened until it broke. Adrien lifted his chin, indignation reaching for its throne. His tongue touched his teeth with a lawyer's ambition, or what? Ilya's smile was a fraction and humorous. Or I make you small. The VTech somewhere. Obeying either protocol or the gravitational pull of money. Killed the screens. The email vanished into the kind of darkness that makes projectors sulk. Mirror inhaled. There's a way a room exhales when it decides to be decent. It doesn't always happen. Tonight the table shifted. The posture of the place, easing not all of it, but enough. Adrien scanned the room and saw the future. Which is to say, he saw himself in the reflective surfaces, and didn't like the angles. He lowered his glass. To my ex-wife, he said again. And this time the words came from somewhere without scaffolding. Apologized. The apology was insufficient. It was not fit to touch the souls of a woman's day, but it wasn't anything. Mira nodded once. Not because it mattered to her, but because it mattered to the choreography of survival. Enjoy your lamb, Ilya said softly and stepped back, and for the first time since he had entered, he looked at Mira, the briefest look, the delicate acknowledgement of a shared past that had not yet been spoken aloud. Mira exhaled. Her hands stopped shaking. The worst thing had been interrupted. And her body suddenly remembered tiredness and hunger, and the strap of her consignment dress nagging her shoulder. That was when she knew she would have to confront all of this. Not in chandeliers, but in daylight, with coffee and the truth. Outside in the cooling evening. The man's lawn waited like a clean sheet of paper. Before the venture capital dinners in Tuscany, any off sites. Before the botanist resin coffee and the therapist who approved Adrienne's boundary setting. Like a notary public. There was a second-hand sofa in a freezing flat. Above a lineate in Hackle Central. The sofa smelled like previous arguments. The windows wore condensation like tired mascara. Mirror and Adrien were 26 and crystalline with ambition. The kind that looks like generosity until it turns into hunger. They met properly in an ideation workshop where the facilitator wrote empathy in a cloud and asked strangers to pretend to be a mobile phone. Adrienne spoke in verbs. Mira drew on the butcher paper without asking. Afterward he walked her to the tube, asking about patterns. And she told him about her grandmother's sari shop in Leicester. About fabric as a kind of architecture. How pleats could hold both tradition and heat in the same physics. He said he was building a platform for home. A sentence that had not yet hardened into pitch. She said she liked the word home, but not the word platform. You sound like you have reservations, he said. Intrigued, as men are when you do not worship. I have questions, she said. And means it. He wanted her from the moment. She refused to be impressed. Later, he told people that Mira was the soul of the early product. And it was true. Until it wasn't. She had hands for systems. Sketching screen flows on paper towels, arranging sticky notes like constellations. While Adrienne had a jaw for stories. Growth. Frictionless. Scale. He wrote their future in bullet points, and fed that story to rooms that rewarded certainty more than humility. They worked. They loved. They replaced appliances with arguments. Their tiny fridge groaned with Tupperware labeled, "Do not forget to eat." Their living room became a lab for empathy. Interviews with people who brought sadness and spreadsheets. Mirror brewed tea and listened. Adrien translated pain into features. When the first angel check landed, they printed it and taped it to the refrigerator. When the app hit 10,000 users, they clapped in the kitchen. When the app crashed at 2 a.m. and took a 100 households' grocery lists with it. They slept in their clothes and apologized online. It wasn't that Adrien didn't love her. He loved her in the way men who love themselves first love anyone else conditionally. Passionately, provisionally. He loved that she could translate chaos into storyboards. Furthermore, he loved less that she asked him to sit quietly with failure. When the money got real, he brought in a coup named Brett, who knew how to wear navy suits and pronounce cost center with a spine. Brett respected Mira's instincts, but resentfully. We need a grown-up. He said once, not to her, and it took 6 months for her to realize he meant not just in operations. The cracks late in year 2 were hairline fractures and mathematical dot when Audrey started coming home. Polished with tequila and strategy, he smelled like victory and something else. He stopped asking, "What did the mother in Wilburn say about the pantry feature?" and started asking, "How fast can we get Chicago Beach Head?" If she spoke about households where food deserts meant kids solved hunger with chips. His eyes warmed with pity and then moved on. The slide that ended them came, dressed as kindness. He had booked a reset weekend in the Cotswolds, an inn where everything had the same clean color. On Saturday morning at breakfast, he slid a folder across the table. "Legal pads do not cause bruises, but they make sound. This is a revised cap table and updated vesting. Cleaner," he said. "You'll like it." She knew before she opened it what was inside. Something about the way he asked her to like it. Her liar too knew. Too charmed by the idea of Adrienne's charisma to distrust his words. Said the revisions were industry standard. Standard for a woman whose function had been redefined as brand empathy. Standard for a first marriage to an idea that had decided to remarry. Money. Mira signed because she believed in the company, because she believed in him, because she believed in a story they had told 100 strangers together, that home mattered. And they were making one. The pen felt heavier than it should have the night he admitted the affair. It was raining, and their flat smelled like curry and printer ink. He didn't cry. He did not. Era realized, have that gear. It wasn't about her. He said, meaning Charlotte, meaning the person who then was only a shadow. A PR strategist from a firm that specialized in reputations. It was about feeling like he struggled for a word that made him noble. Like possibility. She laughed then. A quiet little heartbreak of a laugh that made him angrier than shouting, "Possibility." She repeated and decided, as she said it, that she would not beg to be chosen. The divorce was a choreography of spreadsheets. Lawyers and late-night emails were both of them. Told the truth and left parts out. Adrienne kept the flat. It's closer to Waterloo. The office, almost all the equity. Mira kept the couch with the smell of previous arguments. Because furniture had muscle memory and she wanted to flex her way out. She took the kettle because tea is not neutral. She took a work portfolio that had her name on it, and a bank account that looked like a quiet apology. Furthermore, she took also a new job, Civic Weave, a design nonprofit in Suffolk that built dignity into shelters, community kitchens, and small places where survival happens. Her boss, annoying Ramon, made budgets sit up straight and looked at plans sideways to hear what they were not yet confessing. "You're bleeding," Annalisa said after a week. "Pragmatic and kind. I signed a non-disparagement," Mira said, as if that were a meaning instead of a clause. Annalisa smiled. "I meant metaphorically and probably literally. Startups make people anemic. Here. She slid iron tablets across the desk like an offering from an auntie. And stay. We have work." Mira stayed because people arrived at Civic Weave with hands out and eyes not asking for favors. Just fixtures that didn't fail. She learned to love materials again. Plywood that didn't splinter. Lights that didn't hum with cheapness. Doors that self-close in a way that says, "Welcome back." Not get out double quotes. She learned that a door's weight could be dignity. A DRIEN grew. That is to say, his company grew. He went on podcasts with names like Compound Wisdom and told careful anecdotes about his first marriage to the company. As if Mira were a stepping stone he'd shaped with gratitude. He never used her name. He called her we. Then he called her nothing at all. She let herself be nothing for a while. Then she began again. It started with a lecture on dignity and design at the London School of Economics, where she spoke into a microphone about quiet things. Privacy, lifelines, and communal kitchens. Toddler, accessible taps, the problem of shame in shared refrigerators. Afterward, a man approached in a dark coat, his hair too neat to be purely academic. He asked one question that was so practical it made Mira smile. How do you budget for replacements? So dignity doesn't degrade in year 3? She answered with numbers and a small laugh and the sense of speaking to someone who knew how to listen. He thanked her with a nod that was almost a bow, then vanished into a cluster of students as if he had a train to catch. She did not know then that men like him do not catch trains. Trains consult their calendars. The first text came 2 days after the lecture. Precisely at 900 a.m. This is ILIA. It read, Markov. I listened to your talk at LSE. I would like to contribute to Civic Weave. Not publicity, a grant if appropriate. Mira stared at the words for 2 minutes. There was something Landon about their careful economy. She Googled him. Of course, in the half-sick way people check symptoms. A cluster of articles surfaced. Logistics, ports, a holding company that liked to own steel, but preferred to talk about education programs. Billionaire. A word that turns oxygen to syrup. A rumor about a wife who had died in a skiing accident 5 years earlier. Nothing salacious. The internet, when it cannot find scandal, invents adjectives like enigmatic. She wrote back, thank you. We can send a prospectus and asked annual. Hypothetical if a person with a very large checkbook wanted to take the meeting. Annalisa said because sometimes the future says please. They met at a coffee shop in Borough Market that was loud enough to protect privacy. Ilya arrived without an entourage, which is a kind of entourage, and ordered black coffee with the efficiency of someone for whom time was a unit of tenderness as well as power. Up close, he looked less like a rumor and more like a man who had stopped pretending life was tidy. There were threads of gray at his temples and a small scar at his jaw. Like a crooked thought, his eyes did not move around as much as other men's did. When he looked. He asked precise questions about the weird seam where philanthropy meets utility. How to build bathrooms that were both resilient and not prisons. The way neighbor complaints, smell, noise, fear could be redesigned instead of resented. My mother would have liked your work, he said at one point. Surprising himself, she believed poor is a situation, not a personality. Your mother sounds like a problem solve, Mira said. And he smiled in a way that looked like memory. They kept meeting. He never arrived late. He never texted twice without waiting for an answer. Furthermore, he sent an email one Thursday at 6:01 p.m. I have transferred $750,000 to Civic Weave for the Southern Kitchens and the Stockwell shelters. Electrical work. No naming rights. The wire arrived like a quiet salvation, Annalisa said. Tell your new friend thank you, and Mira said, he's not a friend. Because names have obligations. He's generous. You blush when you say generous, Annalisa noted. The indulgent smile of someone who has not forgotten what it's like to want and be wanted. Mira resisted that want for months. Not because Ilya was a billionaire, though the power imbalance made her itch like an allergic reaction, but because she had remade her life to be small on purpose, to fit in her hands. Being seen by a man like Ilya was like being pulled onto a stage with better lighting than anyone deserves. He invited her to a lecture at the Royal Institution about the mathematics of fairness. She went because the topic was too precisely her, and because his texts came 12 hours apart like tides. After the lecture they walked through Fitzroy as the city undressed itself into night. He did not touch her. He did not make the conversation a ledger. He asked about the places she loved, and she answered, UCLA suites in Tooting. For Satan Poppy, the upstairs table at a Sri Lankan place off Houston where the biryani was a confession. A park bench in Camberwell, where the sky came down to listen. He said, I grew up moving. So home is a verb for me. Then we have the same dictionary, she said. Startled by recognition, they kissed 5 weeks later in a cab that had judged 50 such moments and found none of them completely ridiculous. The kiss was a promise, not a purchase. He placed a hand at her cheek as if it were porcelain, and she had to fight the twitch in her shoulders that said, this is control. He felt the twitch. Furthermore, he stepped back, respectful to the edge of absence. I don't want to be a rescuer, he said softly, as if confessing a desire to an ethics committee. Good, she said, breathless. I don't want to be rescued. What they built in those months was slow. They had rules. Mara invented and Ilya adopted without a fight. No gifts over $200. No sudden appearances at her office. No. Using his name to move her projects faster. He tried once offering to make a call about her stubborn planning. Permission. She said no. He did not argue. He learned to love the word no from her. And she learned to love that. He loved it. And yet there was a shadow at the edge of their mornings. He did not talk about work much. At first he said, the port, the way farmers say. The weather, when she asked about his holdings. Described factories and shipping schedules with the affection of a father and the remove of a chess player. There were whispers in newspapers that he was buying into dislocated assets, companies whose valuations had been chewed by disorder. She did not ask for a list. She did not say, do you own any part of my ex-husband's future? The question felt nosy and unworthy when he finally told her that he had made an approach on Hearthine's debt. It happened in the kind of day that makes London believe in spring. Sun startling daffodils into gossip. They were on a bench near Tate Modern, watching a dog decide whether to be brave about a pigeon. I should tell you something, Ilya said, his voice carrying responsibility like a tray. Mira looked at him and let her heart arrange itself. I am considering acquiring the notes that fund your ex-husband's company. He said. It is rational. The product is salvageable. The leadership may need editing. She was very still. You're telling me because you think it will upset me. She said, rehearsing neutrality. I'm telling you because my motives must be transparent to you, he said, and the word motives felt like both a gift and a warning. I did not pursue this because of you, he said. Then added the truth. Careful only. Not mostly. It is a good business in the wrong hands. Wrong hands you could replace with your hands, she said, and hated the smallness of her voice. The way old history made her sound like suspicion. I could replace them with better hands, he said, not rising to the bait. Not mine. People who believe in kitchen tables more than in conferences. She nodded. You can do what you do. I can do what I do. Those do not have to be the same room. He didn't touch her. If this makes us impossible. Tell me now. He said it was the kind of offer a rich man makes when he has learned that power includes the right to leave doors open. She thought about the night she'd signed away equity because love had used the word, we like a solvent. She thought about doors. I don't want to be impossible, she said. So he proceeded, and she pretended her heart was a diplomatic mission. And they built a calendar over the top of anxiety like a bridge. She invited him to dinner with Annalisa and 2 colleagues from Civic. We've. He arrived with a bottle of wine and listened to an argument about door widths as if it were a sermon. He invited her to a recital at Wigmore Hall. Afterward they ate chips and paper, standing on a pavement that didn't mind salt. He never once said, do you trust me? He knew trust does not arrive as a question. When his late shut up at the wedding became a story, it was because of what came before it, the months of quiet, of permission, of restraint, power that doesn't flaunt itself. Looks like decency until the moment it needs to be stolen. The envelope was a crew with a wax seal that tried too hard. It arrived with 2 other items Mira could not afford. Someone else's silk trousers in a shop window, a candle that smelled like fig and success, and she almost laughed when she slid her finger under the flap and read, Adrien Cole and Charlotte Fairfax request the pleasure. Pleasure is a job description. In certain circles, Mira set the invitation. On her kitchen counter next to a mug with a chip that held more history than the card could purchase, she texted Elia a photo. The card looked obscene. Beside her grocery list scribbles, he called not because he is old-fashioned, but because voice carries more respect than a typing bubble. You don't have to go, he said, and the softness made her throat tight. I know, she said, which was precisely why she wondered if she had to go. It's a trap, she added, trying to make it a joke. A DRIEN loves an audience. Then don't give him one, Elia said. And that should have been the end of it. But being human is an unclean science. Annalisa said there is dignity in no. And Mira said I know. And then later said, very small. I think I need to see it to finish whatever is still half done. Then wear shoes you can run in. Annalisa advised practical even when metaphor was the obvious garment. And take me, if you want a witness. I can do it, Mira said, which is sometimes the bravest lie a person tells. The week before the wedding, a journalist from a business blog emailed, asking if she would comment on Adrienne's journey. She deleted it with a reflex that felt like flossing. A second email came from a PR firm offering to reframe the narrative of the first marriage. She closed her laptop and went for a walk to the little park where every evening a man in a red beanie taught his child the arithmetic of a football. At night, she dreamt she was in a house whose rooms kept rearranging. Doors moved. Thresholds cut her off from familiar furniture. When she woke one morning with her hands gripping the duvet like a shoreline, she finally texted Alia, come with me. There was a pause, 12 minutes this time. But that was age-long in their agreement. She pictured him in a meeting or on a jet that ignored geography. Are you sure? He replied. I think I am, she wrote. I might not be. I'm choosing anyway, he called, and when she said yes, he did not argue. With her courage, he booked a car and an absurd suite at Hallway's Inn next door. Not to show off, but because he wanted to be near. To have a base camp for this ascent. The morning of, she woke early and did the most mundane thing she could. Laundry. She folded tie shirts with a concentration that could convict. She watered basil. Furthermore, she ironed the slate blue dress that made her feel more like punctuation than gesture. Furthermore, she put on earrings so small they looked like secrets. Furthermore, she put on shoes that did not promise speed, but maybe a steadiness that could pass for grace. The drive through Surrey was the kind of Englishness that makes postcards smug. Elia's car hummed with quiet money, and Mira hated that. She noticed he sat beside her with his hands folded. A man practicing stillness because he knew how movement could dominate a room. I can tell the driver to turn around, he said. Not performing gallantry, but offering choice. Or we can stop for lunch and lie about traffic. She touched his wrist. Let's finish it, she said, and the words felt like lancing in medicine. At the gate, a woman with a clipboard smiled the way a person smiles when their paycheck depends on it. Names, she asked. Mira Patel, Mira said, and saw the little flicker of recognition on the woman's face. Not fame, not scandal, just the thrill of gossip. The X. She added, and he's with me. With a firmness that made the woman's pen obey. Inside they separated on purpose. Mira had insisted, I don't want to arrive with you like a chess move. She'd said, if I show up under your shadow, it will feel like I've changed games, but not roles. He had agreed. Though he didn't like it. Text me if you want me, he said. Text me even if you don't know what you want. She stepped into the ballroom alone. Her body, a neat line. The room was a cinema of approval. applause, laughter, napkins angled. Just so, Mira took a glass of water and found the back. Where shadows are taller, she watched as Charlotte's dress fluttered with the adoration of strangers and tried not to hate a woman who had made choices different from hers. Charlotte was not a villain. She was a person with good posture and a mother who loved schedules. It was almost a beautiful day. The vows had been earlier, under a sun that made diamonds into tiny opinions on fingers. The registry had been a list of things that were not meant for use. The canoes were architecture. Then the butter knife struck crystal, and all the oxygen in the room organized itself around Adrienne's mouth. What came after was a slow-motion accident. The images, the captions, the email which had been written in the voice of a woman who still believed she could bend and not break. At the moment between the email and the second laugh, Mira realized she had no idea if she could stay upright. She texted Elia a single period. It was not a word, but it was a meaning. Now he arrived like punctuation, like the kind of sentence that resets a paragraph. The doors, the command, the look at the screen with indifference that somehow made everyone else ashamed at the negotiation. Public but not savage. She watched it and felt two things at once: relief and suspicion. Relief that someone had put their hand on the wheel, suspicion that the hand belonged to someone who could exert pressure for reasons that were not purely hers. Power, she knew now, had fingers after the code. Apology that wasn't after the lamb-teasing ruinous smell. Into the air, after the music attempted to reassert authority over feeling. Mirrors slipped. Outside, she did not want a scene in a room full of cameras. She wanted air that felt unobserved. Behind her, the manor breathed ahead. The lawn opened toward a stand of trees that had seen older humiliations and older grace. "You are okay," came a voice at her shoulder, thick with London and something else. Charlotte, of all people, stood there up close. She looked less like a magazine cover and more like a human who had been told all her life to keep her chin up. Her mascara had flinched once but held. "I'm sorry," Charlotte said, and the words were unpracticed on her tongue. "He is what he is. I thought marriage would fix the edges." She laughed, an exhausted little string breaking. "That's stupid, isn't it?" "Not stupid," Mira said. "Just common." They stood for a minute in a truce, made of grass and decorum. Charlotte's bouquet had tired flowers. Do not owe us stamina. "He shouldn't have done that," Charlotte said, not looking at Mira but at the house, as if admonishing the stone. "He did," Mira said, and the honesty sat between them like a lantern. "You don't have to accept his apology," Charlotte added. And Mira felt a strange rush of gratitude for a woman who had chosen him and was still willing to say he was wrong. "I don't," Mira said, "but I accept that it happened." When she turned, Ilya was there at the edge of the patio. Not intruding, not claiming, hands in pockets, weight on one foot, the way men stand when they are trying to take up less space than they're owed. Charlotte looked at him and then at Mira, understanding arranging itself in her pupils. "Your fiance," she guessed, and the hint of envy was a sadness, not an accusation. "Yes," Mira said, and the word felt both true and provisional, like a contract with room for amendments. "I hope he's kinder," Charlotte said, and then, like a person who had practiced being brave in mirrors, she lifted her chin and went back inside to her party. That night did not end. It merely changed rooms. In the suite Ilya had booked, the windows framed manicured darkness. Someone had left Petty's fours on a tray like edible punctuation marks. Ira didn't touch them. Her body vibrated with leftovers, adrenaline, shame, gratitude, anger, as if her nervous system had become a switchboard. "Say it," Ilya said gently, removing his jacket and placing it over the back of a chair. with that unhurried respect men like him can afford, when nothing is hunting them. Say everything. She sat on the edge of the bed as if it were a witness stand. Why did you do it like that? She asked. Publicly in front of everyone? Was it for me or for the company? He supplied, unoffended. For the leverage. He sat across from her. Not too close. Both, he said. And it was a relief how he refused to sit. The answer. He was hurting you and I had a legal instrument that could stop him without a brawl. I also needed him not to tank the asset with a public scandal. Those truths do not fight. She looked at the carpet. An expensive meadow. I felt owned. She said for a second. By you. Like I had been moved across a chessboard. I will not own you. He said tightly. I am trying very hard not to own anything that breathes. Furthermore, I know, she said, and she also knew that trying is not always the same as doing. He stood and poured water. Then paused. Wine. He asked, a tiny ceremony of consent. She shook her head. Water. Then the kindness of its neutrality. I did not come because I wanted to humiliate him, Ilya added. Sitting again. I came because humiliation was already happening, and stopping it is sometimes the only available mercy. She believed him and still held on to her skepticism because it had saved her before. You bought his debt. I acquired a position. He said, the language of men who know the shape of money down to its fingerprints. I had planned to meet him Monday, to do it quietly, and now he will either accept a restructuring that removes him from operational control, or he will sell to us at a discount later. After breaking more things. You make destruction sound like weather. She said softly. It often is. He said, human weather. They slept badly. Which is to say, they did not sleep at 5. The kinds of birds that prefer estates to cities auditioned outside the window. Mira took a shower so hot it forced small honesties out of her skin. When she came back, wrapped in a robe the hotel believed was an appropriate response to grief, she found Ilya standing at the window, a silhouette against dawn. I do not want to be the solution, he said without turning. I want to be an option. That is a generous line, she said. And also a lie. He smiled without humor. I'm not used to being an option. Then we will practice, she said with a courage she did not feel. She returned to London that afternoon and did something unglamorous. She worked. Furthermore, she drafted a layout for a community kitchen in Stoke Newington where the refrigerator would wear a curtain. Not because it was ugly, but because privacy makes hunger less humiliating. Furthermore, she snapped at a vendor who tried to sell them trash as stainless steel and apologized before he could weaponize it. Furthermore, she rearranged a storage room to fit both dignity and 23 boxes of donated pasta. Furthermore, she avoided the internet. Furthermore, she avoided her mother's calls because she did not have the sentences yet to answer questions about what exactly happened at that fancy wedding for that boy who used to come for dinner and ask naive questions about Gujarati food. Furthermore, she avoided mirrors which were bored with her drama. Anyway, when she finally called her mother on Sunday, Mrs. Patel did what mothers do, who want their children to be both brave and practical. She laughed once sharp as turmeric and then sighed. You went, she said. I did. You ate their food. No. Good, her mother said with a pride. That was half joke, half doctrine. And Ilya, he intervened, Mira said, bracing for opinion. Mrs. Patel made a considering noise. Men like that enjoy intervening, she said. But some do it with cleaner hands. She paused. Do you like him? I do, Era said, and let the truth expand. I think he sees me. Not just my usefulness. That is a start, her mother said. Now make sure he sees you when you are not useful, on Monday. The business press did what it does. It turned gossip into paragraphs and placed photo captions under moments that did not consent. Billionaire. Gate crashes. Founder's wedding. One headline chirped, debt play. Or defending love. Another purred. Someone dug up a photo of Mira at 27 in a black blazer that had not forgiven her yet and typed her name, as if it were public property. Someone else spelled it wrong. Annalisa closed Mira's laptop with maternal finality. We do doors and dignity. She said, let the internet do what it does in its playpen. Adhere thine. The CFO called Elia at 8 a.m. with the new careful voice of someone who had consulted 3 lawyers and a mirror. The following week, an emergency board meeting issued a press release written like a bruise. Operational changes, strategic review founder. Stepping back to focus on vision. Adrien texted Mira a message that began with, I shouldn't have done that, and ended with, you have to admit it was kind of funny. She did not reply. Silence is sometimes how you return a thing that doesn't belong to you. Charlotte, meanwhile, did what women with good posture and expensive therapists often do when the narrative refuses to stick to the storyboard. She took a room at Charges and cried exactly once. She told her best friend that marriage was a room with mirrors and a door she could open if she chose. Saw a lawyer to discuss clauses in a prenup that read like Riddler's moral turpitude. A phrase that tastes rotten, and decided to wait to watch. That week, Elia showed up at Civic Weave's warehouse with a box of donuts and a request. May the first volunteer, he asked. Absurd and sincere, and Annalisa, to her credit, made him carry lumber in a t-shirt, without so much as a logo. He sweated like a mortal and smiled like 1-2. He did not fix anything with a phone call. Furthermore, he stacked. Furthermore, he listened as Mira argued with an electrician about outlets in the pantry at lunch. Sitting on upturned buckets, he said quietly, I have one more disclosure. I knew who you were before the LSE talk. She froze a donut half dissolved in her mouth. I read the blog you kept in 2018. He said. You made lists about kindness in kitchens. You never mentioned Hear Thine by name. But I understood. I came to the talk because I wanted to see if you were as you sounded. And you were already circling Hear Thine, she completed, not needing him to confirm the ache in her wrists was not from lumber. Yes. He looked wrecked with the force of truth. I approached you with clean behavior, but not clean circumstance. She stood needing movement to metabolize. I don't know what to do with that, she said. Honest to the bone. I want to believe we can be 2 people and not an equation. But now, I see numbers behind your eyes. Then give me a different problem, he said without reaching for her one. I can do with my hands something that doesn't move money. Let me carry. She gave him a broom. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. The bargain they hammered out in the days after that confession was awkward and humane. They would take 6 weeks and pretend not to be building a life. They would see one another only in public places. Hands above the table. Furthermore, they would not talk about hearth unless required by law. If Elia took control, he would do it through intermediaries and appoint a CEO whose resume read like a hymn to kitchens, not casinos. Mira told herself the boundaries would save her. In truth, they built an obstacle course that taught them both where their muscles were. Week 1, they met at a gallery in Shoreditch and stood in front of a painting that looked like a bruise. Remembering it used to be a sky, I hate it. Ira said. And then I want to crawl inside it and sleep. Ilya said the painter is trying to fix something that can't be fixed. And then, I have always loved the smell of turpentine, and she saw the boy inside. The billionaire, the one whose hands had learned early how to look older than they were. Week 2. They went to a football match and sat halfway up where you are both. Anonymous and invested. Ilya shouted unexpectedly in Russian when a referee made a decision he considered cowardly. Mira laughed till her sides hurt. You're ridiculous, she said, and loved him for the way he could Forget his elegance. Week 3. Charlotte called Mira and asked to meet. They met at a quiet cafe in Marylebone, where servers glided instead of walked. Charlotte arrived with no armor. Hair tucked behind an ear, sweater soft enough to forgive. I wanted to see you because I don't want to be your villain, she said, opening with grace. Also because I might need a friend who knows how to leave. Ira blinked. Are you leaving? I don't know, Charlotte said. He says the right words most days. Then there are days when his mouth becomes a weapon. Without him even noticing, she stirred her tea, a gesture that gave her fingers something to do with their honesty. When he showed that email, I thought of the things he could show of mine, not emails, things I've said out loud in messy kitchens. I saw my own humiliation on layaway. Mira swallowed pity and compassion and whatever else the body secretes when recognizing itself in someone. It wants to keep resenting. He can be kind, she said. And then he uses that currency to buy permission. Charlotte's eyes pulled and did not spill. Do you love him? She asked. Not to torture herself, but to calibrate the instrument. I don't, Mira said, and Charlotte's body loosened as if a wire had been cut. Not anymore. I loved the person I thought he could be. Me too, Charlotte whispered. And they ate a biscuit like a sacrament. By week 4, Elia's deal team had the outlines of a restructure that read, as mercy if you squinted, and as coup if you idn single quotes t.drien would be the founder emeritus. A title that comes with an office and no decisions. New CEO would arrive with boots that had touched real kitchens. The notes would be extended with new covenants that were less about profit and more about product. The press would be fed language about doubling down on mission. Elia sent Mira exactly the redacted documents he was legally allowed to share with a romantic partner. He did not ask for advice. She did not give it, but she read and saw in the clauses and commas a man genuinely trying to orient capital toward dignity. She also saw the places where power indulged itself. The preference shares that meant control was not a debate but a design. On a Thursday that smelled like rain, threatening to remember its job, they sat in a cafe with steamed windows and shared a plate of eggs, because the world is often the simplest early in the day. I might need to step back, Mira said. Suddenly, Alia's fork paused from us. She said, for a while, to see whether my body can stand up without needing your shadow. I'm grateful for what you did at the wedding, and I flinch when I think about how easily you moved the furniture. He nodded once, the kind of nod that hurts. I want whatever leaves you standing taller, he said, and turned his face enough that she couldn't mistake the effort and the generosity. They took a break. They called it a season because calling it a break felt like cutting instead of resting. In that season, Mira went to therapy with a woman named Frances, who wore scarves like flags from safe countries. She said things like, where does the story end and where do you begin? And what would it mean to be ordinary? Mira laughed at the second question until she cried. She visited her grandmother in Leicester and let herself be assigned to tasks, chopping coriander, running to the shop, holding fabric while pins made physics. Her grandmother tugged a sorry plea and said, we are not always the bride beta. Sometimes we are the tailor. The tailor has power too. Elia used the season. The way disciplined men treat offs. He built stamina. He met with the new CEO candidates and asked them about their least successful meals at home. Furthermore, he dismissed 2 men for answering with anecdotes where staff were the punchline. Furthermore, he hired a woman from Manchester who had run school kitchens for a decade and a food startup for 2. She said systems like a prayer and children like a command. He told his board to stop using the word sticky about users. He did not text Mira every day. Furthermore, He sent one message a week with a photo that made no claim. A stray cat on a construction site. A warehouse window with a crack that looked like a map. His dinner burning slightly in a pan that remained stubbornly tin. She replied with similar nothings. Their nothings built a bridge over the river of everything. At the end of the season, Mira met him on the South Bank, where the city pretends it is a village. They walked without agenda. He did not reach for her hand until she laced her fingers with his. I don't want to be saved. She said again, because mantras require repetition, I don't want the job. He answered. Furthermore, I want a life. And if my life sometimes looks like needing you. She asked, then we will measure, he said, and if the measure is wrong, we will adjust. A person can love a sentence, not because it is grand, but because it offers tools. A DRIEN did something unprecedented. He disappeared. Not a dramatic vanishing. No exile to Bali to work on a book. He simply went quiet. He stopped tweeting about hustle culture. He stopped appearing in photos where lighting makes men look like answers. Furthermore, he kept his office but filled it with fewer people. A therapist, one not recommended by investors, told him to try a thing called not saying the first thing. That makes you feel smart. It was difficult. He had built a life on the first thing. Charlotte stayed, then left, then returned to collect the last box of clothing. Her leaving was not a press release. It was a morning where she noticed she had stopped laughing and wondered if laughter was non-renewable. She moved into a flat with an old friend who bought candles that smelled like clean laundry and refusal. She took a job at a charity that taught girls to speak in rooms that had been designed to decorate them. Furthermore, she wore flats. They suited her better than the stage. One afternoon months later, Adrienne sent Mira a letter, not an email. Not a DM, a letter in his hand, which had always been neat. Even when his ethics.wen single quotes d. She held it as if it might detonate, and then opened it with the same butter knife that had once announced her humiliation. I don't expect forgiveness. It read, I am writing because I don't know who else to practice decency with. I was cruel because cruelty is quick. I told myself the wedding bit was a joke about resilience. It wasn't. It was theft. You wrote those words to me, not to a room. I took them. I think about that a lot now. What I took without asking. I am sorry. The kind that doesn't ask you for anything in return. She sat with that for an hour and then wrote back one sentence. Thank you for practicing. She did not absolve him. She did not invite coffee, but she let the attempt register on the instrument. At Civic Weave, the Stockwell site opened with a ribbon that looked like optimism cut into shape. Children ran their hands along new counters, as if trying to memorize the feel of cleanliness. The opening speeches were short on purpose. Annalisa said, "Function is love." And later they made a plaque that said just that. Because sometimes words deserve walls. Ilya stood at the back with a paper cup and eyes wet enough to explain without speech. He had insisted on no formal credit. But the electricians and the women who ran the kitchen had been told exactly whose stubbornness had made the budget breathe. They thanked him with a second helping of dal. The currency that counts. Mira caught him watching a woman show a 9-year-old how to turn on a tap without jerking it. The boy's mother had eyes that had learned to scan rooms fast. She held herself like an apology that had been refused too many times. We will keep it clean, she said. To no one and to everyone. When the crowd thinned, Mira and Ilya walked the perimeter. He touched nothing. He had learned by now that touching is for people who can replace what they break. I have news, he said, as if offering a second biscuit. Good news. Yes, he smiled, and also complicated. Hearth is stable. The new CEO is both feared and loved. Which is the correct ratio. We changed the app's onboarding to ask Fewer questions. We stopped retaining certain data we had no right to. Furthermore, we are rolling out partnerships with councils to supply pantry staples at cost, not profit. The board is angry. In a way that encouraged me in adring practicing, Ilya said, mouth tilting. He has been useful in 3 meetings and silent in 5. This is success. They stood in front of the pantry shelves Mira had designed with a maker in peak. The wood was warm to the eye. The shelf heights were a compromise between toddler reach and dignity. Math. You could have done all this without me, Era said, and meant both the kitchens and the company. I would have done it differently, he said, worse. Probably with more signatures and less patience. She took his hand there in the pantry, and not for the first time in her life, she felt like she was choosing the right room. They built a rhythm that looked nothing like a fairy tale and everything like a schedule. Monday nights, cheap noodles and a documentary. Wednesdays, she taught him to cook something that did not involve a private chef. He taught her how to negotiate with a contractor without making them hate her. Saturdays they walked, sometimes in silence, the useful kind, the one that does not demand performance. He proposed in a kitchen, not a fancy kitchen. A mess, her grandmother's, where onions were browning, and her aunt was telling a story with her whole body. He did not kneel because the floor was sticky with love. Furthermore, he placed a ring on the counter and said, I want a life with you, where my money is a tool and not a command, and where your work doesn't need my name to be done. She did not answer immediately. She held the ring in her palm, like a pebble that had washed up after a storm. She thought of Traps and Honest, yes. She said finally, not with fireworks, but with field work. Yes. If we keep taking seasons when we need them. Yes. If we keep telling on ourselves. They married at a registry office on a Tuesday, with 7 people and a cake that tasted like coconut. And the future Annalisa wore a suit that made appointments stand straighter. Mira's mother cried into a handkerchief she had embroidered herself. Ilya's best friend from university, the one person who still called him by a ridiculous nickname, signed as witness and told an inappropriate story afterward about a night. Train and bad decisions. The honeymoon was 3 days in Devon. With no signal, they swam in water that bit. They read paperbacks that left ink on their fingers. Furthermore, they came home to emails that could wait one night. Months later, as autumn began to speak, they ran into Adrien outside the British Museum. He looked smaller, which is not always a tragedy. He had a paperback too, one with a cover that suggested he was trying to learn from people who had died before he could disappoint them. Mira, he said. And then, Markov, he nodded to Ilya with an old competitiveness that had been put on a diet. They stood in a circle that was neither comfortable nor hostile. I heard about the Stockwell kitchens, Adrienne said, voice low. Good, come and eat sometime, Mira said, surprising herself with the invitation. He smiled brief. Maybe I will. They separated 3 points on a map that used to be 1 room. That night Mira lay in bed, listening to traffic and to the slow tick of a radiator, and thought about how complicated it is to grow, how some men learn and some men do not, and how sometimes the learning is not enough to undo harm, but enough to stop new harm. She did not forgive, because forgiveness is a cathedral, and she was tired. She allowed instead for the possibility that the world could be an inch kinder in certain corners if certain men kept their mouths closed more often. Power and love and doors. Doors and dignity. She was learning the vocabulary. In the year that followed, the city offered weather as metaphor. Rains came horizontal like commentary. The Thames pried at its banks with old curiosity. Heat waves made pavements smell like melted reasoning. People adjusted. That is what cities do when weather or power tells them a new rule. Adhere thine The app stopped asking for the shape of a user's income. It started asking gently what products the kitchen lacked. On Thursdays, partnerships with corner shops meant you could pick up a bag of basics with a voucher that felt less like charity and more like a receipt for belonging. The growth graph bent not sharply upward, but away from shame. Investors who wanted hockey sticks were told to watch ice instead. Ilya learned how to be invisible in his own company. He attended monthly meetings and kept his hands near, but not on the levers. He left the office before 6. Furthermore, he answered emails with an economy that was not coldness but care. Furthermore, he spent more time at civic weave sites as a man with a broom or a drill who had to be told twice where the screws were. Furthermore, he failed at hanging the door straight until he didn't. And the day he got it, he called Mira from the hallway like a child who had drawn a good tiger. Mira learned how to keep loving without checking for ownership. She made a rule in her head. If a thing could be done with a phone call from Ilya, she would try first to do it without. If a grant's timing would be transformed by his name, she weighed whether urgency belonged to dignity or ego. She admitted to her therapist that sometimes it felt wonderful to have an unearned solution in her pocket. She admitted that she missed the adrenaline of scarcity, even while never wanting to return to it. Francis nodded in that way that meant both you're human and continue. They fought because people who love and work near justice fight. Once in their kitchen, Alia suggested a contractor's bid was inflated, and Mira snapped, "Not every poor person is a scam." And he said quietly, "I did not say poor." And they both heard the room change shape. They breathed. They apologized. Later she told him the sentence she had feared. "Sometimes I feel like your money is a parent, watching me color and saying good job." Too often he laughed, hurt and relieved. "Sometimes my money is a parent," he admitted. "It wants to help me avoid mess." "We need mess," she said. And they agreed to allow a slow cooker to overflow now. And then Charlotte launched a podcast that was not about empowerment, but about rehab for ambition. She asked guests, "What did you think success would feel like? And who did you become when rooms started listening?" She sounded less like a host and more like a cautionary tale. You wanted to follow around to make better choices. Her listeners grew. Not explosively, but with the kind of loyalty that buys mugs and sends emails admonishing ad choices. One episode she invited Mira. They sat in a studio that smelled like coffee and second chances. "You don't owe me this," Charlotte said into the mic, a disclaimer that doubled as a confession. "I owe myself not to be a secret," Mira said, and then, hearing her own words, added, "and to tell the story without needing anyone to be a monster." They spoke about kitchens, about how sometimes money is a force multiplier for harm and sometimes for repair, about how heartbreak can be an education without becoming a vocation. They did not say Adrienne's name. Furthermore, they did not need to. After the episode they went for soup and made faces at a flavor that tried too hard. "Do you ever miss it?" Charlotte asked. "The marching band, the photographable life," Mira considered. "Sometimes I miss being the center of a room in a dress." She said, "But I don't miss the part where men thought the dress was a contract." Sane, Charlotte said, smiling into her spoon. That winter, Ilya took Mira to his childhood city for the first time. They walked streets that had learned other alphabets and ate fish that reminded him of cousins. He told stories he had stored in a locked room, a father who bought 2 bicycles with 1 salary and paid with years of back pain, a grandmother who looked at borders like bad math, a boy who stole a marble statue's finger from a museum and returned it a week later with a note. Did not want to keep it. I wanted to know if I could. Mira listened and in listening, moved in. They visited his mother's grave, a hill that asked for silence and then gave it back richer. He spoke Russian to the marble, apologies and jokes and weather, and Mira stood under a fir tree that shook snow at the ends of her hair and did not intrude on grief. Later he said, "She would have loved you." She would have told me not to be dramatic. Good advice, Mira said, and he kissed her, and the sky approved. In spring, they decided to try something impulsive. They bought a little terrace house with uneven floors and a garden that had given up. It was too much for two people with busy lives who promised not to outsource every splinter. They installed outlets badly. They painted walls poorly. Then better, Mira planted herbs that refused to die. Ilya learned the rhythm of bind. They had neighbors whose quarrels kept them company, and a cat that visited like a tax collector on the day the kitchen was finished. Not show home finished, but we can cook and talk and chop without banging our knees. Finished. They invited 10 people who knew different versions of them. Annalisa, of course, Francis, awkward and tender, the electrician who had forgiven me once for forgetting to send a remittance. Charlotte, who brought a tart, and the amount of grace it takes to eat at your husband's ex-wife's house. Even Adrien, invited last and not expected, showed up with a bottle of cheap wine like a joke about humility. He stayed an hour. He washed his glass. He left the evening, did not combust. People ate too much. Someone cried in the bathroom. It was a good cry. After midnight, when the dishwasher hummed its industrial lullaby, Mira and Ilya stood in their small garden where a rosemary bush was trying to look like wisdom. This feels like a life, Mira said. It is, he said, and it still scares me sometimes. It should, he said. Anything that can break you should scare you. He touched the back of her hand then and added, but we have practiced. The story did not end. It never does. But there was a moment that felt like a coda. A day when the past walked back in, not to reclaim but to return something it had stolen. Civic Weave had a fundraiser necessary and dreaded. The kind where you dress dignity in a nice dress and hope money remembers its manners. Mira hated those nights the way the napkins tried to convince the plates they weren't complicit. But she prepared her slides with care, pictures of kitchens that had learned how to welcome shame and feed it something better. She asked for a number that made sense, not a number that would make headlines. The event was in a hall with ceilings that made voices into sermons. The hosts were kind and impatient. People sipped. Man at a bat table did the face of a person who would rather be watching a match. Mira spoke anyway, afterward, as people performed philanthropy. Adrien approached. He looked like a person who had been humbled not by humiliation, but by the slow work of viewing himself as capable of harm. I made a donation, he said, awkward, anonymous. Mira lifted an eyebrow. Why tell me if anonymity was the point, he considered. Because I wanted accountability, he said. I wanted you to know I was trying to put something better where I took something. She nodded. Thank you, she said, and meant it, and walked away before the moment broke under its own weight. On the way home in a cab where the driver played a radio station that believed in love ballads, like economics believe in scarcity, Ilya said, Mercy looks good on you. Mercy is a jacket. I have to borrow, she replied. It fits, he said that night. In their kitchen, under the light that had a habit of making mundane things look theatrical, they talked about the word redemption. It is a word people use when they want a story to give a receipt. I don't know if there is redemption. Mira said. I know there is repair and practice. Furthermore, I know there is changing the product requirements. Ilya said, grinning, making harm harder to ship. They laughed. They ate leftovers. Furthermore, they sat on the floor because chairs felt pretentious. Later they made a list on a napkin, a habit from the old days that had become a tradition. The list was titled, How to Share Power Without Making It a Romance Novel. It had bullet points like, say the quiet parts out loud, don't let money decide. Pace. Now is allowed without a reason. If a kitchen is clean, a person stays clean. The kitchen apologized before the other person is perfect. They stuck it to the fridge with a magnet, shaped like a garlic bulb. On a Sunday month later, they walked past hallway house with coffee and wax cups. It had been booked for a different wedding. Ribbons on the gates, like compliance. Mira felt the ghost of a laugh in her chest, the kind that is not cruel but aware. "Do you ever think about the shut up?" she asked, half smiling. Ilya took a breath. "The kind that tells a story of its own. I think about how it felt easy," he said. "Which worries me. Power should not feel easy. It didn't to me." She said. "It felt like a suspension bridge appearing useful. Terrifying. I will try to be more scaffold and less Desik chandelier," he said, making her snort. "Coffee. You do have a flair for chandeliers," she teased. And he looked up at the estate's windows and shook his head. "I hate chandeliers," he confessed. "They're always trying to be the main character, like some men I've known," she said. And they kept walking. They spent the afternoon assembling flat-pack shelves and arguing about whether instructions count as tyranny. They took a nap under a blanket that had learned their shape. Furthermore, they invited Charlotte over Tuesday to meet a girl from the shelter who wanted to learn about microphones. Furthermore, they wired money and made soup and sent texts that sounded like marriage. Furthermore, they lived, which is the bravest thing. Day after day. When rain came that night, it didn't announce itself with drama. It began at the edges of the window. A steady rehearsal. Mira lay awake and listened to it and thought about a room full of strangers laughing at a younger version of her. She did not relive it with heat. She visited it like a museum exhibit. This is what humiliation looked like in 2022. Notice the captions. Notice the angle. She closed the mental door and returned to the present, where a man breathed trust beside her, where kitchens were open, where forgiveness was not a performance, but an option on a menu you didn't always have to order. In the morning, she found the napkin list had fallen off the fridge. She stuck it back up and added one more bullet, written in her neatest hand. When someone says, "Shut up to defend you," make sure it's not the only sentence they know. She underlined it twice. She made tea, the kettle sang, and the day began, and the rest of their lives did what lives do. Became imperfectly on purpose. If this story found you, if you felt the sting of a public wound, the relief of a voice saying enough, or the slow work of building something honest, carry it with you. Betrayal can bend you, but it does not have to set your posture. Power can rescue or ruin. May we practice the kind that quietly repairs. If you want more stories like this, messy, human, cinematically paced and grounded in rooms that feel real, tap like. Share it with the friend who needs a soft landing and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Your support helps me write more long-form fiction with layered characters, naughty ethics, and endings that choose repair over spectacle. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Which moment changed your mind? Which character surprised you?